Welcome to This Explainer. So let's jump right in and take a look at something we use literally every single day without even thinking about it, idioms. You know, things like bite the bullet, spill the beans, or break the ice. They're just these harmless little linguistic shortcuts we use to get our point across, right? Well, mostly. There is actually one extremely common phrase woven into our everyday vocabulary that carries a completely different and frankly, deeply disturbing weight.
Drink the Kool-Aid. I mean, you've almost certainly heard it. Or honestly, you've probably even said it yourself. It's absolutely everywhere. Over in the corporate world, you might hear a manager joke that a new hire has drunk the Kool-Aid about the company's brand new mission statement. Or in politics, commentators use it constantly to describe voters who seem to just blindly follow a particular candidate. It's thrown around so casually in offices, on social media, in casual conversations, everywhere.
So today, drinking the Kool-Aid basically means having an extreme dedication to a cause or a purpose. It kind of implies this foolish, blind obedience, right? Like where someone just accepts a totally doomed idea because they've been brainwashed or overpowered by someone else. In modern conversation, it's mostly used to describe a sort of naive enthusiasm. And, framed like that, it sounds relatively harmless, just a colorful little metaphor for falling in line.
But where does this phrase actually come from? Well, I need you to forget the casual, joking way it's used today. We're going to drop the corporate jargon and the political punchlines right now, because the truth behind these four words, it's no joke at all. It is actually rooted in one of the most harrowing, heart-wrenching human tragedies in modern history. The real story here isn't about foolish followers. It's a story about coercion, total control, and a literal massacre.
Chapter 2. The Man, Jim Jones.
Okay, so to truly understand this tragedy, we first have to look at its architect. Jim Jones initially appeared as a beacon of hope, a super charismatic leader promising a better, more equal world. But, as we'll see, it was an absolute masterclass of a facade, hiding some deeply paranoid and controlling intentions. Born in Indiana back in 1931, Jones developed a childhood affinity for Pentecostalism, and by 1955, he actually founded the organization that would eventually become the People's Temple. As his influence grew, he moved his congregation over to California in the 1960s, setting up headquarters in San Francisco and really setting the stage for a massive expansion.
So how did Jones actually attract all these people? Well, he preached something he called apostolic socialism and strongly championed racial equality, which, naturally drew in a highly diverse crowd during the turbulent civil rights era. But the thing is, it was all built on a huge web of deception. He conducted these staged faith healings where he actually used private detectives to gather personal info on the attendees just so he could feign divine insight. He even admitted later on in a recording that he consciously decided to infiltrate the church, basically just to demonstrate his Marxist political ideology.
Now, as his movement really started gaining momentum in California, Jones wanted political clout. To make himself look like this undeniable, massive force to local politicians, he wildly exaggerated his numbers. He claimed the People's Temple had 20,000 members. 20,000. In reality, historical records show he realistically had somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 followers. But to those thousands of individuals, he was rapidly becoming the absolute center of their entire universe.
But behind closed doors, this so-called progressive utopia was an absolute nightmare. Jones would confiscate members' social security numbers and just drain their life savings. He forced people to make these humiliating public confessions of their misdeeds, subjected them to physical beatings, and deliberately isolated them from their outside families. He systematically stripped his followers of their own agency, binding them completely to his will and making absolutely sure they had nowhere else to turn.
Chapter 3. The Paradise That Was a Prison. Welcome to Jonestown.
Eventually, the press started catching wind of his abuses and financial extortion in California, so a highly paranoid Jones ordered the construction of a remote jungle commune down in the South American country of Guyana. The promise he sold them, a beautiful socialist utopia, entirely free from the racism, sexism, and oppression of the United States government. But the reality? It was a heavily guarded prison camp built on incredibly poor agricultural soil. Hundreds of followers were either convinced or just outright compelled to move down there, only to realize they were entirely trapped in the absolute middle of nowhere.
Life in Jonestown was methodically designed to just completely break the human spirit. Members were subjected to grueling, back-breaking manual labor from dawn until dusk. And because the soil was so terrible, food was incredibly scarce. We're talking meals that often consisted of literally just rice water soup. Adding to that profound physical exhaustion, Jones subjected them to severe sleep deprivation. He broadcast his sermons over loudspeakers on a constant loop and forced them into these night-long meetings.
And if anyone even dared to think about running, armed guards constantly patrolled the jungle perimeter with guns and crossbows.
The sheer hypocrisy of Jones's supposed equality is captured so perfectly in this quote from survivor Deborah Layton. She notes that while his followers were deliberately undernourished, weak, and exhausted, Jones kept a private refrigerator. He consumed substantial meals that frequently contained meat, claiming he had, quote, blood sugar problems. Basically, he kept them starving and tired so they couldn't possibly organize an uprising or figure out a way to escape.
This physical exhaustion fed directly into the psychological torture that really paved the way for the end. Jones introduced something he called white nights. These were horrific late-night drills where alarms would just suddenly blare and the exhausted community was summoned to the central pavilion. Jones would falsely announce that mercenaries or the CIA were hiding out in the jungle, preparing to attack, torture, and destroy all of them. The cruelty of these white nights was just chillingly methodical. First, sirens would sound. Then, armed guards would surround the pavilion. Finally, everyone, and yes, that includes the children, was forced to line up and drink a small glass of red liquid. Jones told them it was poison and that they would all be dead in 45 minutes. As people wept, holding their kids and literally waiting to die, Jones would eventually reveal it was just a fake loyalty test. He was psychologically conditioning them, completely normalizing the act of dying on his command.
Chapter 4, The Day It Ended, November 18th, 1978.
By late 1978, relatives back in the U.S. were desperately pleading for the government to investigate these claims of human rights abuses and hostages. This pressure finally caught the attention of U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan. From here, the timeline moved incredibly fast. On November 15th, Ryan arrived in Guyana with a delegation of journalists and concerned relatives. By the 17th, they actually traveled into Jonestown itself. During a reception there, a temple member secretly passed a note to a reporter, just begging for help to escape. By the afternoon of November 18th, the entire facade had shattered. As Ryan prepared to leave, 15 temple members declared they wanted to flee with him. As Ryan, the journalists, and the defectors frantically reached the nearby Port Kaituma airstrip to board their planes, Jones's gunmen, who were known as the Red Brigade, arrived on a tractor and just opened fire. 11 people were severely injured and 5 were killed. Among the dead were members of the press, defectors, and Congressman Leo Ryan himself. To this day, actually, Ryan remains the only U.S. representative to be assassinated in the line of duty. Meanwhile, back at the compound, Jones knew his empire was over. He knew the U.S. government would be coming for him now. So he called his followers to the pavilion for the final time. And we know exactly what happened next, because a tape recorder actually captured the whole horrifying 45-minute ordeal. As members wept and showed clear signs of dissent, Jones told them to stop their hysterics, ultimately declaring, "We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide, protesting the conditions of an inhumane world." What followed was absolutely not a mass act of willing devotion. It was a methodical execution. Armed guards with guns and crossbows surrounded the pavilion, under strict orders to shoot anyone who tried to flee. Jones commanded that the infants and children be murdered first, using syringes to squirt poison straight down their throats. With their children dead, the grieving adults were then forced to ingest the poison, which was a fatal concoction of cyanide and tranquilizers. And those who resisted, they were forcibly injected with it against their will. Chapter 5, The Aftermath, A Shattering Reality. The very next morning, the Guyanese army literally had to cut their way through the dense jungle to reach the compound, and what they found remains one of the most deeply disturbing scenes ever recorded. The silence of the jungle was broken only by the sheer incomprehensible scale of the loss of human life. 918 people died that day. 918. It was actually the greatest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until September 11, 2001. But perhaps the most shattering reality of all this is that over a third of these victims, 304 of them to be exact, were innocent minors. Children and babies who had absolutely no choice in the fate handed to them by a madman. Which finally brings us back to the phrase itself. The cultural myth tells us that these foolish followers gladly, blindly drank the Kool-Aid. But the historical fact tells a vastly different story. First off, it wasn't even Kool-Aid. The poison was actually mixed into a cheaper knockoff brand called Flavor Aid. But more importantly, these people were hostages. They were starved, sleep-deprived, surrounded by armed guards, forced to watch their own children die, and over 70 people were actually found by medical examiners to have been forcibly injected with the poison. They didn't just drink it willingly.
Because of this massive misconception, the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid is considered deeply, deeply offensive by the relatives of the dead and the very few survivors who managed to escape into the jungle that day. To them, it isn't a funny little metaphor about office culture or political enthusiasm. It's a phrase that victim blames hostages and entirely erases the sheer terror and horrific coercion of their loved ones' final moments.
So the next time you're sitting in a meeting or you're scrolling online and you hear someone casually drop the phrase drink the Kool-Aid, ask yourself, will you remember the real human tragedy behind the punchline? Will you remember the 918 lives, the 304 children, and the terrifying reality of Jonestown? Language is incredibly powerful, you guys, and understanding exactly where our words come from is the very first step in honoring the truth of history.